Hi, this is Buffy Hamilton from Creekview High School in Canton, Georgia, and I'm going to take just a few minutes to share with you some reflections on assessment as an essential aspect of the collaborative process with our classroom teachers and students. I really came to see about a year and a half ago that assessment, for me anyway, was really the missing piece of the puzzle in thinking about the collaborative efforts that I was attempting to facilitate with not just our classroom teachers but with our students. And when we're thinking about assessment, sometimes that term gets a bad rap, particularly in the aftermath of No Child Left Behind. But as we began to unpack what we really mean about assessment, we need to stop and consider two important questions. The first one is, do we see ourselves as invisible or visible and indispensable teaching partners? The second question to consider is, how do we feel about assessment? Is it just something that's intuitive and just happens to happen? Or is this an essential and thoughtful and intentional part of the learning process? I say that it truly is an integral and absolutely vital aspect of the learning process. And as we think about, well, why should we as school library media specialists play an active role in the assessment of student learning? We really need to stop and consider that when we think about ourselves as teachers and we're advocating for our role as teachers in our learning communities, we really can't claim that role or provide any kind of evidence of how we're impacting student learning and really being thoughtful in the instructional design process with teachers and students without taking on an active role in the assessment of student work and student learning. Just as we wouldn't even consider a classroom teacher providing instruction without forms of assessment, we need to hold ourselves as school library media specialists to that same standard when we think about the different aspects of quality instruction. In addition, we know that our AASL guidelines for school library media programs actually and it very explicitly state that the school library media program should be guided by regular assessment of student learning to ensure that the program is meeting its goals. And again, without these snapshots, it's very difficult to really know if your instructional strategies are working. So we have to think about ourselves as being embedded in the instructional design process with students and teachers. And there are many different models of instructional design, but I particularly like the model of backwards design. It's very easy to remember. Three vital aspects of that model. Thinking about learning outcomes, thinking about designing different types of assessments, and then moving into creating and designing learning experiences and instruction for students. So we begin by identifying very specific learning targets. What is it that we want students to know? And this is where we can look not only to our content area standards, which of course are going to be the priority for classroom teachers, but we can also think about the learning targets that are embedded in our AASL standards for 21st century learners. As we look at this criteria, it's extremely important to think about how do we state that in terms that not only we as the adults understand, but in language that our students can understand. And Chris Lehman often refers to this as creating a vocabulary of learning, a common vocabulary about teaching and learning. And that shouldn't be just for teachers and administrators, but students need to master that vocabulary so that they themselves can articulate and truly understand the different performance standards that they're going to be demonstrating. We then move in to selecting different strategies and tools that we'll use to conduct the assessment. And this is where we can really work with our teachers and students to develop a well-rounded kit, if you will, of different types of assessment strategies. Once we've identified our learning targets and we've identified the tools or mediums for assessment, then we can begin really getting into the design of the different performance tasks, and we can really start to think about what kinds of learning experiences do we want to create and types of instructional strategies to help students achieve those learning targets. So in essence, assessment provides us snapshots of student work that allows us to not only know where students are in the learning process, but it also allows us to be responsive and organic as we adjust our instruction based on the students' needs. And we can't really know what those needs are or know where they're at in their learning without regular and ongoing types of assessment. This is where we need to think about 3 types of assessment: formative, summative, and self-assessment. And when we're thinking about assessment, again, we're looking at learning targets that will not only address the product, but also the process of learning. So formative assessment, in a nutshell, is the measurement of knowledge and skills during the process of learning. And it can take on many different mediums, but this is probably the type of assessment that, unfortunately, is most neglected in today's classrooms. There's so much emphasis on the summative or the end assessment. Formative assessment really is essential to helping, if you will, head off problems at the pass, or to nip possible hiccups, if you will, in learning experiences for students as we go along. Again, if we're incorporating these ongoing assessments on a regular basis, kind of think of them as checkpoints, then we can make adjustments and address any potential challenges or identify perhaps gaps in student understanding, or to realize, wow, we really did not do a very good job of explaining that to our students. We need to revisit that conversation for learning. Formative assessment allows us to be responsive. Formative assessment should also be, again, regular and reflective in nature. And I think most importantly, it does frame teachers and students as partners in the learning process, so that students feel that they too have a sense of agency in these ongoing means of assessment. There are many different types of formative assessments, but a few examples of teacher-led formative assessments might include simple types of things like checklists, which I particularly like, rubrics. You could use different types of physical or virtual exit cards or slips, sometimes also thought of as tickets out the door. You could do observation checklists, and my favorite, mini interviews or consultations with students. And these are just kind of individual, no more than 5-minute conversations to just really talk to students and get a sense of where they're at, provide a short inquiry, and perhaps make notes to ourselves to see where they're at in that learning process. Examples of student-led formative assessments might include learning logs, which could be done on blogs or in different types of note-taking, again thinking about metacognition or reflection. Students could engage in self-assessment or teacher and student-directed assessment through video-recorded reflections or narratives. Graphic organizers like KWL charts, concept maps, and mind maps or idea webs are also a great form of assessments that students can manipulate and be engaged in. Students creating questions, that can be a type of formative assessment, again to kind of see what do they want to know and how do we help them get there. Sharing or reciprocal teaching can be another, I think, interesting form of student assessment, either teacher to adult or peer to peer. And finally, peer review, in which students are providing constructive feedback to each other of student work. Summative assessment is a form that probably more educators are familiar with, and this is the measurement of knowledge and skills at the end of a process of learning in order to determine the amount and quality of learning. Unfortunately, in this day and age of No Child Left Behind and now Race to the Top, most summative assessments tend to be objective or standardized tests. But I'd like to offer you a couple of other suggestions based on the work of Dr. Barbara Stripling. Summative assessments could take on other forms, perhaps presentations or learning portfolios. It could be a text or a digital type of created composition or paper. It could be a reflective narrative, again, that could be done with traditional text or perhaps through video or audio. It could be a multimedia type of creation, maybe like a voice thread, a student-created video, or a Glogster. It could also include alternative genres of writing, such as art or a musical performance. Of course, tests and exams are always going to be there, and we do want to be mindful of preparing students for those types of assessments, but to not let that be the end-all, be-all. And then finally, performance-based tasks that students might perform. The other missing piece of assessment when we're thinking about this as part of the instructional design process is how do we give students a greater responsibility and a greater role in engaging in self-assessment, and how do they contribute to that? Again, our standards for the 21st century learner in action specifically outline a variety of self-assessment strategies or indicators for different responsibilities and dispositions. So we can look to that professional resource for ideas for self-assessment strategies for our students. I think what's probably important to keep in mind when we're thinking about the pros or the benefits of student self-assessment is that it does encourage participatory learning, in which students are part of that conversation for learning and they're taking on an active role and they're not just passive receptacles of the assessments that we're providing. It increases intrinsic motivation and helps students to really be actively engaged in the thoughtful construction of new meanings. And most importantly, again, it gives students a sense of ownership and agency and feel like they have a really important voice in their learning. And unfortunately, so many of our students are denied those kinds of opportunities. So this is where we can make a difference as librarians, is to gently nudge our classroom teachers and students into incorporating these types of self-assessments. We can pretty much take most of the formative and even, I think, a lot of those summative assessment mediums and adapt those where students can engage in self-assessment. Students can and should be part of the evaluation process in which they can do that assessment with a rubric, or they may even help construct the rubric. I think that's a really important strategy, is to get students involved in identifying what does quality work look like and how do we know it when we see it. And of course, we can continue to use traditional types of assessments, or we can scale them out into a virtual type of assessment tool with today's Read Write Web. So I want to share with you just very quickly what this process has started to look like in real world practice for us with our high school students in grades 9 through 12 at Creekview High School. One of our favorite forms of both formative and summative assessment are narratives that students complete on their learning blogs. And they may be engaging in reflections about the research process, or it could be maybe perhaps a literature study of unit. But we have found that students find this to be a really thought-provoking type of learning experience, in which we're really asking them to engage deeply and to think deeply on the learning process. And of course, this lends itself to students gaining new insights, to being part of a community of learners, and again, to thinking a little bit more deeply. Students could also do this through video, and I think it's very exciting that whether they're doing a written blog post or they're agreeing to be part of our school our library video channel, students can communicate and share not just with their peers but with the world at large what that learning process looks like and where they're at in their thinking. I think that's one of the things that we find most exciting at the Unquiet Library. Google Forms can be another great tool for both formative as well as summative assessments. I've seen elementary school teachers use this, but this is a free tool in which you can create either objective or open-ended types of assessments. And what's really terrific is that all the results are pulled into a spreadsheet into Google Documents that looks very much like Excel. This allows you to share that document privately with teachers and students, if applicable, in which you can really go through the data then and see patterns and take a look at what the data is or the responses that you're getting to, again, then be responsive in your instruction and to really get a sense of where students are in their learning. You may be creating digital or virtual learning portfolios, maybe with a tool like VoiceThread, in which students are showing samples of their work and articulating what standards that portfolio reflects and how they know it does so. And again, this goes back to Dr. Violet Harada's emphasis on using language that students can understand to express and articulate what it is that they are understanding as part of the assessment process. You could also use a free resource like Wikispaces, in which students can post their work and share with others, and they can also take advantage of the discussion feature tab to again, they could do blog posts on the discussion pages, and if they're engaging in peer review, you can also use the discussion tab for that. You could, again, use low-tech forms. I really love using graphic organizers with our students, and we've really stepped up the use of those in the last year for a variety of different learning experiences. What's, again, exciting about even a traditional type of paper format like this is that with student permission, you can then scan in that work, or if students are going to incorporate this into a learning portfolio, you can very easily scan that in and incorporate the JPEG or whatever graphic file you want to use to show, again, that as a sample or a snapshot of student learning. We also love using Google Documents for not just peers talking to each other and providing feedback, but this is a wonderful medium for me to engage with students. So if I don't get to talk to them in class, then I can use that commenting thread and share with students feedback, or they can ask me questions, and we can again have a nice kind of ongoing conversation about the work that they're creating in that. And of course, again, blog and video posts that you might feature on your library blog, in which students are articulating a skill or a certain set of skills that they have mastered. Really, I think is the ultimate expression of learning, because this is where you get to honor students' newfound expertise, and I think that probably means more, especially to teens, when they are regarded as experts. That those opinions matter greatly to them within their peer groups. So we love showcasing students sharing their narratives and stories of learning. We also love using Noodle Tools or Noodlebib as a form of formative and summative assessment. We like using the assignment drop box, in which students can share their works cited pages and their electronic note cards, and then both I and the classroom teacher can provide feedback to the students and let them know if they're on track, or we can see where they're having trouble with the selection of sources or citation. And again, it lends itself to really being embedded anytime, anywhere in the lives of our students and teachers. And this was something that our sophomores in particular really responded positively to this past spring. Again, traditional rubrics are always good, and I think probably one of the things that my teachers do appreciate about me is that I'm more than willing to get the ball rolling and to find sample rubrics and then to build upon those and then get the teacher input, student input for crafting, again, that final kind of rubric that we're going to use in student work. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, peer review is also a favorite form of assessment at the Unquiet Library, in which students are providing constructive feedback and constructive criticism of each other's works. And this is something we really do a lot with digital creations as well as learning and project portfolios. Another kind of quick and easy type of assessment you can do with students, and this is sort of a high-tech ticket out the door, is to use a tool like Poll Everywhere, and students can participate in open-ended or more objective types of questions. And I find that not only can this be a great quick form of assessment, but it could also then be a conversation starter. When we look at the responses together as a class, we can use that to have a conversation about learning and to then maybe find some new lines of inquiry as we move through the instructional process. You could use something as basic as observation, and again, you could use a checklist. If you're observing maybe, say, a group discussion, we've been using fishbowl discussions this past semester quite a bit. And so this obviously requires that I need, along with my classroom teachers, need to listen closely, but we also ask students to give each other feedback on different skills that they might be demonstrating in these discussions. And again, they could do that perhaps through a checklist, a Google form, or again, something as simple as a note card, or perhaps based on the discussion in the fishbowl that day, we're going to ask them to come up with new questions now that they're interested in pursuing based on what they heard from each other in the group. And this is obviously, even though the format is pretty low tech with good old-fashioned index cards, this is obviously a little bit more advanced type of thinking for our students. So in conclusion, I hope I've left you with some food for thought about the importance of assessment and why we as school librarians need to take an active role in that as we frame ourselves as teachers and learning partners with our students and faculty. 3 reads I'd love to recommend to you: 21st Century Learning in School Libraries by Kristen Fontachero, who has edited a wonderful collection of articles that includes great strategies for assessment. If you have not read Assessing for Learning by Dr. Violet Harada and Dr. Joan M. Ushina, this is also a treasure trove of ideas and theory and rationale and concrete strategies. And then probably my favorite of the 3, although they're all really wonderful, is the text Librarians as Learning Specialists, Meeting the Learning Imperative for the 21st Century by Dr. Allison Zamuda and Dr. Violet Harada. Again, any of these 3 are awesome starting points, but these are 3 works that have really influenced my thinking over the last year and a half, and I hope they will do that for you too. Thank you so much, and if you have any follow-up questions, I'll be sharing the slide deck with you with the complete list of references that you see here, or you're welcome to contact me through email, Twitter, or my blog. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.